Hello, scholars, and welcome to this lesson on counterargument. In the next few moments here, you will become a master of the counterargument. That's the deal. So let's get right to it. Counterargument, what is it? Typically, when we hear the term counterargument, we think of the following definition. We think of an argument or a set of reasons that is put forward to oppose an idea or a theory developed in another argument, right? It's the opposing idea. So if an argument you were making is we should eat ice cream, right? Pretty good argument. The counter argument would be it has too many calories. Now it's one of many possible counter arguments, but it's one common example. Now there is a difference between the thing and the technique, and this is perhaps the most common misconception as students begin practicing argumentative writing and as students begin experimenting with the counter argument. So the thing is what we just discussed, right? An argument that opposes an idea or a theory, right? It's the counter argument to your arguments. Now that is much different from the thing you're being asked to do when you write a counter-argument in your argument, right? You are being asked to implement the technique. The technique is different. The technique is when you are making an argument, you bring up that counterpoint, right? That counter-argument, you bring it up, something that the audience is probably wondering about, and then you discredit it. And that is the most important part, that you discredit it, right? You take all of the credit that it seems to merit and you invalidate it. You make it seem incorrect or not worth worrying about. This, of course, is the hardest part, right? Actually discrediting something that may be a very valid argument. It's very difficult, but you must discredit it without making the audience feel stupid, without making the audience feel like you are manipulating them, without being condescending, without the audience even noticing that you're doing it, right? They should simply feel like you're being honest with them, you're being truthful with them, you're being thorough in your consideration of the arguments, and so you know enough about the topic at hand to bring up these opposing viewpoints, to actually tell them what they're probably already thinking, and then to make them feel better about knowing that it is not actually worth worrying about, right? But very difficult to do, to discredit it without making them feel stupid, manipulated, like you're being condescending, and without them even noticing. Here is a very basic example. It is the ice cream example, but it works very well as far as getting this point across. So here is an argument that I've begun crafting for us. The argument is that we should go out for ice cream. It's hot outside, and there's nothing more refreshing than a scoop of frosty vanilla ice cream. It tastes so good, and the weather is perfect for it, right? Decent argument. However, the audience that we may be addressing here is thinking to themselves, yeah, okay, but ice cream is fattening. Okay. And you're not even mentioning that, right? You're ignoring this fact because you don't want to talk about it. And so clearly, you have not given this argument enough thought, so we're not getting any ice cream. Not interested. Now, if we continue and we include that counter-argument here, we say, I know that ice cream has a lot of calories, but it's such a hot day. What have we done? We've mentioned the counter-argument, and so the audience will think to themselves, okay, well, you've acknowledged my thoughts. At least I know you're thinking about them. But they still seem like valid thoughts, right? You even said it yourself, that ice cream has a lot of calories. So I don't want any more calories, and I don't want any ice cream. And your argument is not any better off. This is the most common mistake that students make. Now, if we can try and discredit that, right? If we can try and ease the listeners' worries, ease the audience's worries. For example, I know that ice cream has a lot of calories, but we'll burn those calories off if we walk to the ice cream shop. Right? So we have brought up that counter-argument, but we have discredited it. We've made it less of an issue. And so now your audience is probably thinking, I was going to say that ice cream is too fattening, but you're right. Maybe that isn't a concern at all. If we walk over to get it, hey, that sounds great. That sounds even better. And we can continue, right? We can reinforce that point. We can say, in fact, if we go to the shop across town, we'll get a nice workout in the process. And there's no better way to spend this afternoon. You're just driving that point home. And if you want to make it even more powerful, you can create urgency. You can say something like, let's get going before the place gets busy or before the place closes. And in creating urgency in your argument like that, following a strong counter-argument that is validated but then discredited is so powerful, right? This argument is so much stronger than it was when it was just those few gray sentences up there. So here is the counter-argument structure. It's very basic. You can probably figure it out yourself now that you saw that simple ice cream example. But there are 2 basic steps. It's very simple once you see the framework. Step 1, what is your audience thinking? Get inside their head. What are the possible counter-arguments, and which is the most prominent considering what you know about your target audience? So there are many counter-arguments as to why ice cream might not be something that someone wants to go out and consume. So you need to know your audience well enough to figure out which is the one that they are probably the most worried about. And step 2, make it sound like a valid thought. Say, hey, you might be thinking this, and you're right. That's actually, you're a smart person, and thank you for being part of this argument, this conversation, but here's why we don't have to worry about it, right? But discredit that valid thought. Think about the ice cream example with the calories. A very common pitfall, probably the most common pitfall, is pointing out the counterargument without discrediting it in a thoughtful fashion. It's just mentioning that counterargument, right? And that is a terrible idea. That is the thing that happens the most when students make the mistake as they're writing counterarguments, and it totally weakens, it totally undermines your point, right? It totally does the opposite of what you wanted to do. So whatever you do, make sure you discredit the example that you bring in. Super important. I like to think of this as a 1-2 punch, right? That's what helps me to really remember this counter-argument structure, right? Think of it as a 1-2 punch. Punch number 1, that is the setup, right? You beat your opponent to the punch. You know what they're about to throw at you, and before you give them the chance to do it, you beat them to the punch, and then punch number 2, that is the clincher, right? That is where you take advantage of what you just created, that opening you just created with the first punch, and you just drive it home. And it's very important to keep your audience in mind here, right? Keep your opponent in mind. That first punch will look different no matter who it is that you are throwing it to. Think of a boxing match. If the person is very tall, if the person has very long arms, if the person is very short, everybody's a little bit different. And so that first punch, that setup, that counter argument is going to look different based on who your target audience is. So we've developed a lovely little metaphor for you. You may remember the game Punch-Out. It's an awesome game, but we'll go ahead and pursue this metaphor here. So there you are on the left, right? Little arguer, that's you, and you want to get ice cream so bad. That's what you want. That's your argument. Now, if you are speaking to this guy, right? Lactose Joe is what we've called him here. Well, he's lactose intolerant, and he doesn't have a working air conditioner. And knowing this about this guy, right, about this target audience, totally changes the way that you create a counter argument for him. If you were trying to convince him to get ice cream and you said, I know you're probably thinking that it may have too many calories. Well, he's not thinking that, right? That is probably the last thing that he's worried about. He's worried about a host of other things, health issues perhaps, right? And so that is the counter argument that would be most effective for this audience. Now, if you're speaking to someone else, someone like this guy who is on a diet and counting his calories but very hungry, you might be able to get away with the counter arguments that we crafted just a few moments ago. If you're speaking to this person who hates having to spend money and is very easily irritated, then you'll have to approach it in a much more delicate way, and it probably has much less to do with health or calorie intake, but with the cost of the ice cream, right? And of course, you may be speaking to someone who simply hates you, who hates your guts, who doesn't want to get ice cream with you, who doesn't even want to speak to you, right? Who is annoyed with the fact that you would even dare to ask them to get ice cream. And this is a much different kind of argument, right? For this kind of an audience, you would probably begin with the counter argument because they wouldn't listen to anything that you had said the entire time, right? The entire gray paragraph, that whole argument we wrote about getting ice cream because it's a hot summer day, they would probably blow you off before you even said any of that. But if you began with, hey, listen, I know you don't like me, but suddenly you've got their attention, right? Suddenly they are thinking to themselves, it's human nature to think to themselves, okay, well, at least they got that right. At least they know what I'm thinking. But this is a much more complex kind of argument, right? When you're speaking to someone who hates your guts, it's much different. Typically, your counter argument will go at the end of the argument that you're writing. So we've developed a lovely little exercise for you. It is called Counterpunch. It's a little game. It's going to give you an opportunity to practice this 1-2 punch and to master the counter argument. Teachers, if you are listening, head over to teacharguments.com/counterpunch to grab these materials now.